I know that it's going to be the last lecture who is going to be talking about mining issues, but mining issues, I know that Talent is going to be working about water. So that's why I had a very special challenge. I think that Aaron mentioned that every single one of us was striking out topics and themes of ideas that we want to start our presentation. So what I will be trying to do is to, of course, I'm going to be sharing some of my research as part of the things that I have doing at the Mining Engineering Department in the University of Chile. But also, I want to be able to also give you my thoughts on some of the ideas that past lecturers have already been saying on these different ideas related to mineral resources. Yeah? So that's why I have my title on responsible, reliable, and real. That is are most of the things that we are expecting for minerals to provide to the society. And that's sort of kind of my main motivation to get into the research is like how society manage those mineral resources that seems to be scarce, but also that seems to be very important for different places of the world. And particularly, I'm going to be touching on that question of what drives the development of mineral resources. So having said that, I'm going to be using Aaron's presentation to do my introduction. So that's going to be my way of connecting the dots across the days in this workshop, in this summer school. And I'm going to be starting with what makes people care about minerals. So we're going to be talking about those narratives that Aaron was mentioning, but with this more of a political science perspective. And I say that because narratives are very important as an instrument to create collective action. And that's very important when it comes to minerals because it's very hard to find those narratives that actually summarize a lot of the ideas that we want to get to mobilize people to take action. And that's, I think, that's going to be an important topic, and that's going to be my introduction. Then I'm going to try to relate to what has already been said or mentioned, this idea of just transition that you heard from Appa, you heard also from Jocelyn, and the idea of what consumers can do, what can be done in terms of research on that area that Irene put us in the spot when she was asking, what can we do as a consumers? Can we change those sort of things when we're thinking about responsibility across the value chain? And after, I'm going to be sharing some research on this idea on if we have those deposits, what is making them develop? So why are people developing those things? Are those things about climate, environment, the social conflicts? Are they affecting how are we developing those mineral deposits? That's going to be the question that I'm going to be touching through my presentation. And with the first idea is that we have this narrative on the energy transition that I think we have already talked so far. What I want to share with you is something a little bit different because I think from a political perspective, I chose to put that graph that you know that is outdated. You're going to see that is 2021, but I did it on purpose. Because if you actually check the International Energy Association webpage, you're going to get like the latest report from June, maybe. You have another one from May talking about critical minerals. So what is the importance of that graph from 2020 first? And I think what is really important from the aspect of policy making is that it's the consolidation of this idea that if you want to understand energy, you need to start to understand what's going on with minerals. And that's very important because minerals were not important for people. I mean, for a political perspective, probably us who have been very much related in the mining industry, but for the rest of the people, that's not that important. But when you created that connection between energy and minerals, that became important. It's part of like a political agenda that you can drive. And people in the IEA, they were asked in 2020 to create a new team of people to understand mineral markets, how they are used, and they consolidated that a lot of information in 2021. And they were asking a lot of countries, and I know this because I was working in a part of the Chilean government at that time. I just came back from my PhD, and we were asked to please give your recommendations of these sort of ideas that we're planting in this sort of report, because this is going to be important for the UN, for the countries. It seems to be like consolidating this idea of the energy and material nexus that we have. So what happened with that? And when you have this idea of material important for the energy, And that's what I was mentioning before. Energy is a very important political topic because there is no development without energy. Nobody has been able to crack that distinction between energy and economic development. And this is the idea that after you make that connection of minerals and energy, you have now the aspect of security. Primarily, you were asking about energy security, but it's also appearing this idea of national security. And that's the second narrative, I'd say, that I want to highlight in this idea that minerals are becoming more important for people. And what is the issue here? So we're also starting to see a lot of books, from journalists talking about materials, minerals. There's I think that never in the past 15 years I have seen so many books about minerals. I mean, written for non-specialized people about minerals. And that's interesting because it means this is more important for society, so we care more about them. And however, this is also there, as Irene mentioned, the other narrative that is warfare, national security, but at the end might be not that relevant when it comes to the people developing those deposits, as Aaron was kindly mentioning before. So what do we have here? So independent of the narrative that you're choosing to have, because I said choosing, because this is a political instrument. The narrative that we're going to be using is still pushing you in the same direction. And this is a very scarce, let's say, tool for political scientists. I'm talking about this, but I have working with political scientists, not that I'm myself one. But to have a narrative that is able to converge people from different ideology into something. And that's weird, like a unicorn. And that's why I think that this has had a lot of attention. So we have these elements of climate action, this element of security, both energy security and national security, but we also have this old narrative that I got from Aaron, who was saying yesterday. That is I would say, traditional narrative of economic development as any other economic activity that you might have. And this is my thought on what Aaron was asking. I say, well, it seems to be like material, let's say critical minerals, is not like a very important narrative for people. It's not like changing their decision. And that's why I was thinking, critical minerals is mostly a narrative for consumption, for consuming nations. You will hear that aspect in Europe, you will hear it in the US, you will hear it in Japan, in China, in India, in Korea. You don't hear that much about in producing countries. You started to hear it after. So in Chile, we have critical material strategy, 2025. In Brazil, you have another critical materials strategy. Again, just a few years ago, you started to hear that in Canada, in Australia. But it didn't resonate much with the traditional supply side perspective because we're not care about much about consumption. And I think that's where I relate with the people that where Aaron was mentioning, that are looking more opportunities, economic activities. That's why they care about it, because it's usually when you are close by, something that might care for you. So having said that as an introduction, I want to focus on these three topics that I mentioned. So responsible, reliable, and real. And there seems to be this thing that we need to order things in three. So that's why I try also to be in this same idea. So when it comes to responsible, I'm going to be sharing some ideas on how do we care, or what can be done if we want to differentiate the way that commodities are being produced. So, for example, if you want to get something out of the ground, something that is a metal, it's called a commodity. It means that it doesn't make a difference where you're getting something from. It's not something that is an aspect of quality. It's not like you're buying a phone. It's something that you buy because of their properties, the chemical, physical aspects, and that's why you care about it. The cathode, a copper cathode, is going to be the same. Either you get it from the DRC, you get it from the US, you get it from Chile, you get it from Australia. It's going to be the same. So why is something that we can do if we want to make difference in the way that this metal or this material is being produced? On both sides, on the production side and the consumption side. And the reliability, I just want to share a little bit on the critical materials aspect. I'm going to be a little bit shorter on that. And lastly, I'm going to be talking about, okay, we need to remember also for those things, not only to be our idealized part of the world, we also need to be real. Those things need to happen at the end. So responsible is the room to differentiate a commodity on how it's produced and consumed. So we started this idea particularly because in mining, and most of you might not that much related to mining, but there is like a key strategic aspect in any mining activity. That is, I want to be the lowest cost producer. That is the way that miners compete because they have an homogeneous product, something that is undifferentiated, something that is going to be the same. Either way, you're going to be producing whatever in the place in the world you are. So that's kind of an issue because there are no incentives for miners to actually care much about the process other than the regulation, maybe the strategy that they have with the people that they have, like in a community. That might be important if they care about water, if they care about emissions. That might be something that they need to do for their very local aspects. But there is no like general incentive for you to be more efficient on those things. So what we wanted to look at here is there might be room for to differentiate those commodities. We had some examples. So you look at the diamonds. I think that we happened to have like a conversation about that on the blood diamonds. So there was this Kimberley process that allowed you to actually trace back how diamonds were being mined, sourced, if there were aspects of child labor, there was aspects of guerrilla warfare, and they were related to that. And it's very hard, so it's a very specific example. And well, diamonds are not homogeneous, so that's right. When they are bigger, they are like more expensive. So it seems to be like a challenging position. But still, there are some examples when we talk about other commodities. Whenever you go and buy something, you're going to get a green label. So there might be something affecting also your consumption in a way that you care about how this product is being made. So there seems to be some links to that. So we also have some ideas on the traceability aspect. There are some norms, standards, protocols, the copper mark, IRMA is also happening. And we also start to happen like new technologies for traceability, blockchain. So there seems to be like room for a potential change in a way that we can also check how things are being produced and we can track that information across the value chain. So with that in mind, we have this research. I'm going to be putting some QR codes if you are just willing to check on the different papers that we have here. We check how different copper mines were in terms of sustainability aspects. So for example, you might think, what makes a mine different when it comes to water consumption? Would you like to buy something from a mine that is using less water to produce copper? What about their emissions? If they're emitting less CO2, would that be valuable for you? So what we wanted to check first is there any room in the way that materials are being used by those mines, the material intensity, so like a life cycle assessment, in several aspects, not only water emissions that we were able to gather from sustainability reports. We had like almost a little bit over 50% of the global production of copper we were able to gather from this emission, from this data. And we also get some other numbers that are not available at the local level. So let's say governance, you look at the rule of law, the institutional framework, and so on. That's going to be more on a national level. But we also gather more economic and social indicators that, unfortunately, are not available at the level of communities, social, regional, only happen to be widely available for at that national level. So we see where is more room for differentiation. It means mines are way more different in the amount of water that they need to produce 1 ton of copper. And that's going to be, let's say, you might say, well, there is room. So if I care, there might be a mine using like 10 times the water that the other one is using. That might be one aspect that you might say. But the other one is like, it's very difficult for the industry or for a mine to actually come and say, well, maybe we need to care about water now because I know we're very different. When you know what there is high inequality, there is very little room to collective action. It's very hard to make like a deal because you know that it's going to be hard for you. If someone is going to be way better for you at water consumption or water efficiency, it's way harder as an industry to come together and say, well, let's put this as a brand, as a mark that we need to get a premium from the market. And that's going to be like kind of the challenge, especially, and something that I think that Irene mentioned, who is the most who's the most likely to be better off than the rest? High-income countries. High-income countries are eventually the ones with better performance indicators in sustainability aspects. Something to take into account as well. What about from the consumption side? On the consumption side, we have this idea, okay, we are going to be able to trace back. So there's going to be a paper on traceability and the different standards and frameworks that we have. And we are currently working, so there is Paulina Fernandez, some of you might know her, because she was also a past Restore student. And she was working on this idea on traceability. But in the meeting that we have with her, we came up to this aspect that we need to know is, well, we need to put consumers as also in this idea. We need to understand how people make their decisions, their behavior, the consumption preferences. And she's doing a PhD in mining engineering. So what do you think you need to go and look for people who know about those stuff? You need psychologists, you need behavioral scientists, you need marketing specialists. And that's what we do. So we went with a marketing specialist, and he's a professor in France, and he was kind enough to help enough to build a survey, to understand how to actually they measure those things, because they have a different methodological aspect. And that's very keen because we have this multidisciplinary aspect also in this sort of research that I'm not going to be able to share with you the results because it's a working paper and it's still under review, unfortunately. But given this idea is that at least like the key result that we have is like people seems to be about, let's say, 5 to 10% more likely to spend. I mean, if you pay like $1,000 for an iPhone, maybe you are willing to pay 30, 50 extra dollars or euros in order to be aware that you're going to have a label saying this was sourced responsible. And that's a huge market incentive because the value of the metals that are contained in this electronic appliance is less than 5%. In some cases, less than 1%. So you're giving a huge market signal if that preference are able to trace back to the mine site. And that might be changing as well our ability to provide incentive for the miners as well to change some of the practices, to avoid this cost leadership trap that we were talking right before. Okay? The second topic, I still have a few minutes ago. So is the aspect of reliability. And I just want to mention something of this idea of critical minerals. I don't want to be repeating my former lecturers and former colleagues. We have done some research comparing the way that different countries talk about criticality. I know that this is like a consumption side of the story, a demand side story, but the story is not the same. So even though this is like something that is being talked by Japan, China, the US, and Europe, they all have difference in the way they interpret something that is being critical. And in that regard, I know that most of the people seems to be very well aware that the problem seems to be, or the supply risk is kind of at the center of when they're talking about critical minerals. They don't care much about, okay, there is little substitution, and we know that from different studies, there might be of importance of the aspect that is being used, but at the center, independent of the narrative, is the idea of supply risk. And who is at the center of the supply risk? The one in red, right? It's all about China. It's the same in Europe. It's the same in the US. But what do you think? Well, it seems to be China. This is a more recent graph. But it's all about China's story. And it doesn't make sense because if you go to China, they also saying some minerals are critical for them. And why is that? Because China, even though they have a lot of control in the manufacturing, in the processing stage, they don't control like the mining stage. And this is way different on the other critical energy material that we had before. Oil and gas was fairly more concentrated in the world than minerals are. That's why China is also defining critical materials because they don't have everything. They might have the processing stage, and that seems to be like the biggest concern now. But as you can see, they also have listed cobalt as a critical material for them. And that would explain why they're phasing out or they are not using that much nickel metal batteries, as some of the lecturers were saying, that they might be using more lithium phosphate batteries. They are less, even though they control, you might say, like the cobalt supply chain, they also are willing to change the other materials because they don't control the mine site. They always know that there is a risk at that. So all the work is taking action in this aspect. So don't always put China on the spot, because I know that there is going to be way more other aspects to consider when we're talking about how reliable is going to be the supply chain. And I think that reliability is also about quantities, because it's not only that we care or we have some concerns of this idea on the concentration, on where the materials are coming from, but it's also this idea that we don't have enough. And I think that also Irene mentioned this idea. There might be looming gaps on production. Oh, and they've been so far, like a lot of time we have said that in the past, but how the market will adapt these different information aspects, and some of them have been showing so far, increasing prices. That's what we have seen so far. But it's also this idea that we might not getting enough because we're not able to put that much of a stress in this system. So think about the mining system, the industry as a system, and you're putting a lot of stress whenever you're showing some graph like this one. You're saying you're going to need 8 new escondidos. You're going to need open up like 10 times the mines that you have been building. That's a lot of pressure for a system. And that breaks reliability, increases vulnerability when you're putting a lot of pressure on them. So it's another aspect to take into account as well. And get to the last part of my presentation. And that's why I started to this idea on the gaps that you're showing, because you also need to close those gaps. You need to have that production to actually happen. And with this into mind, we were really interested in looking at the lithium as a very interesting example, as a battery material and an energy transition material. And we look at the production in different places across the lithium triangle, that is salt flats, brine deposits that are located in Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. So we look at 40 different salt flats, and interesting, we have different status. So not all salt flats are being developed. We don't even have geological information, or very little. Some of them don't even have like grades, like to know how many or how much of lithium is there. Some of them have some exploration. Some of them are being developed. Some of them have feasibility studies. Some of them are mines that are actually producing or extracting lithium. So we have some difference or variation across that variable on the status variable. But we need to gather some more data on the variables that were different at the very local level for those different salt flats. So we have geological aspects. Either if we have resources are reserved, that would be great. But at least we have surface for the salt flat. And we have in some aspect something related to grade. We have also governance aspects. And this was interesting because we had information at the subnational level for Argentina, particularly because it's a federal state. And we have information from the socio-environmental conflicts from the EJ Atlas that also Aaron was showing up to you. So we have this idea of what we were expecting. We were expecting that if you're closer to conflicts, you're less likely to develop a deposit. That was true. If you have better resources, you're more likely to develop the mine. It's true. You have better, let's say, indicator of governance, you're more likely to develop a mine. That's true. And we were also expecting, and this is part of our climate change project, but we were also expecting that if that site, they're very vulnerable in terms of climate change. They're very specific ecosystem in the salt flats. So we were expecting that if you're going to have less water or higher waterfall events, maybe you're going to be less likely to develop. So we're going to be checking also how important were climate change elements into explaining if that mine or that deposit will become a mine or not. And what would we found when we were just gathering, okay, we found that the sign of these different variables was aligned with what was our expectation. But when we just count the calibration, I would say, put the weight on how important is each variable into explaining the status of that deposit, if it has become a mine or not. And we were fairly surprised that the most important variable was governance, at least for lithium in this lithium triangle. And we usually have a rule of thumb that you might have looked into. There is the Fraser Institute survey of mining companies, and they have this idea of that geology explains like 60% of the decisions when you're investing, like at least in exploration. And the governance is about 40%. So we have actually an industry, let's say, index that we can compare to our results. And we got that is like reversed, mostly about governance when you're making decisions about developing salt flats in Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile with the data that we have. And geology seems to explain only at 20%. We weren't expecting to get the climate change to get at 0%, so it was better not to put the variable into that. So it seems to be that, well, they are developing those salt flats and they don't care much about, or at least the potential changes on climate doesn't seem to be affecting the decision of the mining companies developing those materials, those deposits. And that's to be also, and I like this contrast of the idea, okay, we might have this ideal of what do we want for mining. So we want this idea for miners to be able to trace back the process, to be more efficient, to be more responsible. We want it to be secure, the supply chain. But it's also, when we look at the reality, well, at least it shows us the gap that we need to fill, the work that we still need to be done, and the research that is still needed by different communities. Okay, so that's coming to the end. I think that I have just 3 minutes. So just bringing it together, my 3 ideas that I was mentioning: responsible. So differentiation is possible, even though we have different commodities, and we might also be able to change or to trace back those preferences from consumers in order to meet the gap on these different incentives that's going to be in the production side. On the reliability, well, it is concentrated, but I want to highlight that it's less concentrated than our other energy options, and that would be important as well for the world. And lastly, it seems to me like governance and geology seems to be the driver's aspect for now. And I think that is very positive because governance is something that we can work on. And that's interesting because we can, even like conflicts should, in a democracy, we expect the conflicts are going to be taken by institutional framework as well. So I think that is like on a positive view, that is something still to be done. And if I happen to have another hour, I will be taking the second part because I started like with this like broad question. I think that I just put in some of my research along it, but I'm missing that sort of question that I have here. So I was just touching on this idea of what drives the development of mineral resources. But I think that my second, like, if I have like another extra hours, I said, it would be what drives development from mineral resources. So when we're talking about people, if I already mentioned that there was the importance of institution, of governance, and there is a lot of set of topics, or I would say research that also I have done related to taxation, industrial policy, exploration, social investment, distribution, mining benefit. And I see that all of these things are part of like that second question that for sure is the things that I'm also working on, and we're happy to talk as well. So having said that, thank you.